In an effort to bring the war closer to the Japanese homeland, on February 19, 1945, American military forces began an amphibious assault on Iwo Jima, a tiny island 660 miles south of Tokyo. The campaign was expected to last only a few days, but Iwo Jima became the bloodiest battle in Marine Corps history.
I had lots of friends who were killed on Iwo Jima, and close friends. And it bothers me. You know, this has been one of the first times I really talked about this. Even it took me years before I didn't talk about this to anybody, you know, because it's just something you didn't talk about.
We thought it was the end of the world. I mean, there were a lot of dead Marines everywhere.
I'm being very candid about this. If you were wounded, and not seriously, but wounded enough to get off the island, you were very fortunate. Because if you stayed, you were going to die. And that's exactly what you're thinking about, scared to death most of the time. And anybody that says they're not has got to be psychotic.
The total casualties during 36 days before the final victory at Iwo Jima, the Marines suffered 25,851 casualties, of which 6,821 either died or were missing in action.
I don't know, maybe that's the wrong way to look at it, but I always felt the guys that died have a right to all the honors they can get. But by God, the guys that lived through it were there to get killed, and if the cards didn't fall that way, it wasn't their fault.
It bothered me tremendously. It does to this day. I'll never forget each and every one of them exactly how they died. You just don't forget things like that. I don't anyway.
That was my baptism of fire. I was in 2 other wars, and in combat more than once in both of those wars. But nothing stands out like the Battle of Iwo Jima did.
I really wanted to enlist the day after Pearl Harbor, but I was only 15 years old, and I was engulfed in the same wave of patriotism that sent thousands of men to the recruiting offices all over the United States.
The Japanese were our enemies. They attacked Pearl Harbor. Germany was France and England's enemy. And they had sunk some of our ships, but only because we were sending stuff to France and England. And we needed to whip our enemy, and I'm glad I was in the Marine Corps and I fought our enemy.
I wasn't going to give my business to the Army or Navy because I really felt that the Marines had the best looking uniform of anybody. And you know those posters out in front of the post office says the Marine wants you? That sucked me in.
Well, I had an uncle that was in the Marines, and he said it was a great outfit, so what could I do?
When I reported in to the colonel of the post in Camp Gordon Johnson, he said, "Have you ever seen a duck, Lieutenant?" I said, "No, sir. I've seen them duck hunting, but not these kind of ducks." And with that, a great big vehicle went by, a big truck with a boat body on it, and it had a colored soldier driving it. And he said, "By the way," he said, "are you prejudiced towards colored people?" I said, "No, sir, I'm not. As a matter of fact, sir, I don't know any colored people." And as a result, he said, "Fine, we'll put you with a colored unit." I said, "That's great. Good opportunity."
As far as the patriotic part is concerned, I never thought about it one way or the other. I felt it was my duty as an American to go, but like I said, if they had left me alone, I would stay at home, to tell you the truth about it.
So we called the men all together, and I told them, I said, "I want you to know that the Marines only want the best, and that we are the best amphibious truck company there is, the Army has to offer, and they have selected us to be part of their group. Now, I think that's a terrific honor." And nobody cheered. It was, but it wasn't.
From ship to shore, that's the basics of it. From wherever ship is out there that need something brought into land and up on the beach, that's what our job was to do, whether it was troops or whether it was some equipment.
After boot camp, I had volunteered for Carlson's Raiders, and we were out there for, probably 3 weeks. And believe me, that's no place to be. That's a suicide. They were training you to kill your own mother. And one day they told us that they couldn't really handle all of us there, and some of us would have to be reassigned. I thought, oh, I hope I'm called off for this.
Well, I was hit on Guam, and they sent me back to Hawaii. I assumed I was going to go home. I had 18 months overseas at the time. But, you know, the best laid plans, they tend to go amok, so they sent me back to my outfit.
And they called me off for the tank battalion. Oh boy, I get to ride. Went over to Jack's farm, and well, the mud was about 4 feet deep, and we were living in tents, but it's a lot better than Carlson's Raiders, I'll tell you.
I know that my original squad was gone. Everybody was dead except myself and another guy. And he was wounded on Guam, the same hole I was, and he killed himself later on. Emotional problems.
When I joined the outfit, they was already formed and had their things, and we're like replacements coming in. And being like one of the youngest, and 6 months is a big difference in age. You know, it's like you're the younger brother. We don't even want you around.
They were bringing people in from all over the country, and just masses of brand new Marines, and some Marines from guards and stations, and very few officers, and very few non-coms, and utter chaos.
We get orders to ship out, and we sail out of Pearl, and about 2 days out, Colonel Butler came on the speaker system of the ship and told us of our destination, that we were going to an island called Iwo Jima, and that Iwo Jima was the island closest to the heartland of Japan than any other battle. And there was a kind of a stunned silence.
Iwo Jima, I had never heard of it. It was an island. And so I was going to get to go. Before the war ended, I was going to get to do something that I had been trained to do, and I was damn glad, and I was damn proud, and I couldn't have done it with a nicer bunch of guys.
I'd always fought in the jungle before, or a semi-jungle. Guam is kind of a semi-tropical. And this was just a hunk of rock. And none of us could see any reason for taking it, tell you the truth.
I slept on the bottom deck because my name was Wolf, and there's only one guy below me, a little Italian named Zoto. And the damn water kept getting us wet. You know, water would seep in out the bottom, and the bilge pumps would keep it all out.
A lot of people were writing letters home, and for some of these were the last letters they ever wrote, of course. But I had a superstition, if I didn't write home, I'd come home.
There wasn't a lot of talk from the old-timers about what to really expect. You knew there were guys going to be wounded, other guys, not you, but other guys were going to be wounded, and other guys were going to be killed. You knew that.
They had maps of it. They had relief maps. They showed us where we were to go. And like the military, they always have a plan. And like the military, it always goes astray.
When I saw this map of Iwo Jima, after having been on the canal, I thought to myself, my God, when I saw the installations on this map, that was my reaction, my God. I didn't tell my men anything, just kept it to myself.
The early training, they indicated there was 5,000 to 7,000 Japanese there, and we were explained that this was probably a 5-day operation, kind of like the length of Tarawa.
There had been 72 days of bombing. They had hit it every day and sometimes twice a day. They said this is the biggest softening up that any battle has ever had, and we shouldn't have to worry about anything opposing us when we go in.
We felt that since it was 5 miles long and 2.5 miles wide, and we had so many Marines and we'd been so well trained, we thought that would be a breeze on our way to Japan.
I looked out there, they said there's 880 ships in a convoy. I know, I go up there and look out and you couldn't see nothing but these ships. Every place you look, these ships, the ocean was full of them. Then everything was lovely till we got there.
Interesting thing happened just before we were lined up to go down into the hole where the tractor deck was. And our Lieutenant Dreger, John Dreger, shook hands with each one of us as we went down. And it's almost like if he knew something.
But then we went down to the hole to get our last meal, so to speak. We had steak for breakfast. So we come out on deck after having a steak. I thought, well, I don't need his mess kit anymore. I threw it over the side. And some guy says, oh, you can see the island. I said, what's it look like? He says, describing the island, you know, with a flat and a suribachi on the end.
Pretty soon, there's great big bow doors open to this LST, and looking through there, I can see the Mount Suribachi. You could hear the clank of the steel against steel as we went out the door, and I know it's too late to turn back because we're Iwo Jima bound now.
When you climb over that rope and net down the side, and that guy above you, he's stepping on your hands, his damn rifle is shoving in your head. And the boats are going up and down about 20 feet, and you try to drop off in it, and maybe it's coming up when you're going down, and it's a horrible crash. And people fall in there. It's a hell of a mess.
Yeah, Steve and I were the only ones in the tank that, other than the driver, that could see what was happening, and we're witnessing one of the greatest bombardments that ever happened to anything.
It's a funny thing, but you know, everybody thinks they're kind of macho. They don't want to show that they are scared to death. And so you tend to light cigarettes up and talk the macho language, you know, I'm not scared, let's get with it and all that stuff. Deep down, you know they're lying like dogs because you've already been through it yourself.
Oh, the noise was overwhelming. It was just deafening all over because you got 3 battleships and cruisers and every type of ship that could fire anything laying offshore, softening up Iwo Jima. The smoke and dust and debris almost obscured the island. We couldn't hardly see it at times. In my mind at that time, I thought, well, they've probably killed them all, hopefully, and that we won't have much of a job to do, but I was completely wrong.
Now, on most practice landings, you're going to get your feet wet. The coxswain always stops short of the beach. But this day, he put that boat clear up high and dry, and when he dropped the ramp, there was black sand. And I don't think anybody had ever seen black sand. I was about 3 rows back, and I'm looking at it, and I think, what the hell is this black sand?
You have to remember that you're cranked up on adrenaline, which is one of the strongest drugs in the world that your body generates. And, of course, adrenaline prepares you for fight or flight, one of the two.
I wanted to be first, not because I'm brave, but because I knew from other stories that the Japanese always let the first wave get across the beach before they laid down their barrage. So I wanted to be off of that beach as quick as I could. I get about halfway, and this whack, whack, that's the way it sounded, like when they start laying the barrage down. And then I thought, boy, am I going to go deaf from the sound? It was so loud.
This Japanese general waited until we had the 3rd wave had come ashore, and he had a great target, and then they opened up on us. All hell broke loose at that time.
Noise. I don't know if that's even a good description, because noise doesn't fully explain what it was. You know, the plane motors, the naval shells, the machine guns, the mortars bursting, guys hollering at one another. It was just bedlam, of course, right at that point.
I had a pair of 750 binoculars, and hour after hour, I watched landing craft being blown out of the water, tracked vehicles trapped in the black sand on the beach, bodies blown apart and flying into the air.
The shells are literally coming down like rain. There's explosions everywhere. And of course, being my first time in battle, I didn't know what to be prepared for, and I didn't think it was going to be like this, though.
The other point was that we didn't know about this horrible, horrible 6 or 8 foot deep volcanic ash sandy beach.
When you tried to dig a hole or anything like that, the sand just poured back in it, kind of like trying to dig in a wheat bin. And so we were just laying out there and with no cover at all.
And this is one thing that I don't give a damn how much training you can get. You don't get prepared for seeing your first dead Marine.
My buddy was like from here to that tree a little farther away. He carried a flamethrower, and there was that stretch across the island, and he started zigzagging across. And the next thing I know, that he's nothing but a puff of smoke. I dropped, and what went through my mind, I have no idea. But I do remember taking off, the flamethrower had straps on it. I took these straps and took them off, and they extended out about 2 feet. I took my belt off, and I tied that to the end of that. I took my shoestrings off, and I tied that to the end of that. And it took me 2.5 or 3 hours to drag that thing across that 300 yards, whatever it was. If that thing went up and I was 10 feet away, I might get burnt, but I wouldn't get blown up like my buddy got killed.
The Japanese kept firing at me, and they were getting pretty close to me and kicking dust up in my face. So I rolled over a couple of times and went over next to a guy and said something to him. And he didn't say anything, and I turned to look at him. And his face had been hit. Of course, he was dead.
And Pat came over to me and he says, somebody's guts hit me in the face. And the only thing I could say, what in the hell are you telling me for? You know, I had enough to worry about. I want to hear you horror stories at this time.
I had instructed all my squad people to stay put when there was a bombardment. And he made the fatal mistake of moving. I know he was going for that shelter, but a mortar blast got him in the stomach, pushed his BAR bandolier into him, and he died in my arms when I got to him. You know.
So you were hunting shell holes, any place to stop and sort of organize yourself. Who's where? Where's Chapman? Where's Covington? Where's Higgs? Where are all of these guys, you know?
So then that's when they were looking at their maps, and when they came around and took my picture, and by the way, I was yawning at that. I wasn't calling any range, I think they said. I just saw him out of the corner of my eye, and I thought, damn, he should have took my picture while I was yawning. Well, I had a good pose.
On the way across, I saw my first Japs about half an hour after we were ashore. They were as scared as I was. Their eyes were this big. I guess mine were too. And before I could draw a weapon on them, they were back into their holes.
And as I look back towards the beach, I can see Gunnery Sergeant John Basilone is up, walking around and telling people to get up, get moving, don't stay here. You know, you're going to get killed on the beach if you don't get going.
The pillbox was pretty well hidden. You wouldn't even know it was there until you were right on top of it. And the only thing you could see was the flash, because the Japanese had the smokeless powder. They had better powder than us.
He ran up and ordered me to put my machine gun in action against a target, and I didn't see any target, but by looking down his arm, and when the wind blew away, we could see the aperture to a blockhouse or a pillbox.
Naturally, that's where your demolition people and your flamethrowers and Bangalore torpedoes were all used, and a lot of young boys bought the farm trying to get up to those babies too.
I'm young and, you know, not that long in the service, so I didn't know what to do. And then before I knew it, it was a machine gun over here, a machine gun over here, and they both zeroed in on it, and I could see the tracers. I could see the machine gun fire going right into there.
And then the demolition man probably from Corporal Ralph Belt's demolition squad, Basilone directed him to go up to the pillbox with the satchel of composition C2, which is a 10-pound charge. And the demolition man ran up and threw the 10 pounds into the aperture.
And then Peg, he has this flamethrower on his back, 60 pounds of flamethrower, and he's real muscular. And he went right along the fire line there, up there, and put the flame in the pillbox. And then as soon as he did that, he come back and he was really bushed.
At this point, Sergeant Basilone, I realized he was standing astraddle me, and he screamed in my ear something about, "Get the belt."
The next thing I knew was this guy comes up, this Marine comes up and stands right on the top. And he had his buddy up there on top, and they're waving their nose at the Japs down there, and he calls a whole company up on line. I thought, who in the hell is that?
When the Japanese defenders that were in this blockhouse came out, they had napalm all over them and were burning, and they were trying to wipe it from their bodies. And he used the machine gun to mow them down.
Later I find out it was just John Basilone. I thought, he deserves a Congressional Medal. Anybody says he don't deserve it, they're crazy. He's really a Marine's Marine. I mean, he really did it.
Probably at that time, we were the spearhead for the entire invasion. We had penetrated further into the island than anything.
We crossed the tip of the airfield, and I dug in over there. That was our objective, and we were there.
A little while later, I have no idea the time span now, I could see Basilone leading a group of men across the airport there, and some mortar rounds hit among them and killed John Basilone. For his actions that day, he was awarded the Navy Cross posthumously. And being the only Marine in World War II to win the Congressional Medal of Honor and the Navy Cross.
Why, the first three waves got in and kind of scrambled around, and then they stopped everybody pretty much at the shoreline. We couldn't use the Navy counter-battery fire because the guys were all over the land. So they had to bring in their own howitzers. So we got the call about 10:30, send in the artillery. First problem was we went about 30 yards and there were 100 or 200 dead Marines everywhere. Myself, I have never touched a dead man at that time. So this Marine lieutenant and I got up off the duck and we picked up at least 15 to 20 dead Marines and moved them because we weren't going to run over them.
So anything you learn, all the training didn't help. Didn't help any. The only training we had that helped was how to get the duck out of the water up onto the ground and how to get off of the ground into the water. But as far as saving yourself was concerned, you had to be lucky.
Sergeant Wynn, who was a close friend, was put in charge of the beach control. And we were taking the Marine casualties out to the hospital ship. And one of the ducks got out past the breaker line and the motor conked. And it started to float back. Now, we had 7 or 8 Marines on stretchers locked in. And the duck floats back, hits the shoreline, and tips. And all the Marines are hollering, all the wounded, and we're trying to do something. And then the waves recede and it levels up. One more wave and it goes upside down. Joe grabbed the cable from the tractor, went in underneath the duck, and when the wave came and turned the duck almost over, he hooked on, crushed him into the sand, but he hooked it on and they were able to tighten up and hold the duck from overturning. And he saved all those Marines' lives. He got the Silver Star.
The Japanese had rushed reinforcements to Iwo Jima over the summer and fall of 1944 to the extent that the air campaign and the submarines allowed. And they had built their garrison up to over 21,000 men. They were unusually well equipped with artillery and mortars compared to other garrisons that the Americans had encountered in the Pacific. They had eschewed, as part of this defensive plan, offensive tactics. You didn't need tanks, for example, all that much. They weren't going to come out of their entrenchments to attack if they could help it. They were going to hold back, stay as protected as possible, and force the Marines to come at them.
I was in the 3rd Marine Division. We went in the 2nd day. We thought we were going to not have to go because we were told it was going to be a cakewalk. It wasn't going to be too tough, and after all, it was already 2 Marine divisions ashore.
I think they hoped that the bombardment and the shelling would exterminate the defenders of the island. I just don't believe they knew how deep they were buried.
But then we had shore-to-ship radio over the PA system. And we start getting a particular feeling that, hey, it's not going like they said it was going to go. It must be tough there.
What was not known at the time was the maze of caves and catacombs that the Japanese had tunneled into the island. And you have to remember, they didn't have any buildings above ground. They had 23,000 men on the island, subterranean, living subterranean. All the fields of fire were predetermined. The island was defended triangularly in depth. I guess if they have a triangle here and here, all these pillboxes are in a triangle, and they have interlocking fields of fire. And they also had interlocking subterranean tunnels that connected them. So when you're attacking one pillbox, they just left that one, went back to another one, and started shooting at you from the other pillbox.
We're back in reserve, and there's a disabled tank over there. And I'm thinking, okay, I'll go in and dig alongside that tank, and I'll have extra protection. Well, the Japs zero in on that tank and start putting some shells down there, and I thought, cross that out, that's a bad idea. Keep as far away from that sucker as you can.
I knew when I was hit, it was like a hammer hitting my hip. And I knew I was in this machine gun lane, and I knew I had to get out of it, and I took another 2 steps, fell forward, and Rodney and J.J. Holt pulled me in. And I remember Holt looked at me, he said, "Ras," he said, "I didn't know you wore glasses."
Every shell the Japanese shot on Iwo Jima could hit something. It was only 5 miles long.
You stood up, and that's when they dropped the 4th mortar. And I looked at this guy, and his face was just a bowl of raw meat. And I couldn't move. I was paralyzed from the waist down. And this guy, I didn't think he'd ever see again. And between the two of us, we had to go back through that machine gun firing lane. And he was the locomotion, and I was the eyes. If he had been panic-stricken, I don't know if I could have handled the situation, because all I could do was tell him where to go. He was the one that provided the motion. And between the two of us, we made one damn good Marine.
You're looking for a way to be safe, you know. And I don't like to say, this is another thing I don't like to talk about, was there was a row of little islands like stones out there on that one side. And I thought, hell, buddy, you could swim out there, you're a good swimmer, and hide on that thing till that sucker's over, you know? Well, the Navy put a barrage down, and they just went from one end of those to the other. Getting them, I just crossed that out. That's a bad idea.
You were sent to supposedly a safer area, but there wasn't any safer areas on Iwo Jima.
When we ran out of ammunition, we started throwing hand grenades at them. Now, we ran out of hand grenades, too, and when that happened, when we threw our last grenade, I told John Wright, I said, look, let's get the hell out of here. There's nothing else we can do. And when I said that, the first Jap grenade that hit me in the arms in here, I was seriously wounded. There's no way this Cajun could have gotten back to the front lines. John Riley saved my life.
As it grew darker, you became more apprehensive, because not knowing what the night's going to bring.
You were in 2-man foxholes, and one slept while the other stayed awake. And the first night, I hesitate to tell these things about a fellow Marine, and I think he got killed though later. But I woke up and he was asleep, and he begged me. He says, "Don't tell John. Don't tell John." I didn't squeal on him. I was too stupid.
All the cans of water had been used for gasoline or fuel oil before, apparently, and before you drank it, you had to kind of skim the oil off the top of it. We had to bring our own water because there was no natural water on Iwo Jima, and the Japanese would later on suffer deeply from this.
There wasn't any front. The Japs would filter through your lines, and they'd be looking for food and water, and then they'd be trying to get back to their caves, and they'd be coming at you from behind.
I had a foxhole about a foot deep up there in that hot volcanic soil, and I just lay there and looked up at the stars. I was pretty uptight. I was just as frightened as anybody else. And I thought, you dumb fool, come off it. God put you here to take care of these boys. I'll do it. After that, I was okay. I don't mean I wasn't frightened, but I was certainly a lot more relaxed and just went about my duty without worrying about whether I was going to get my head blown off or not.
Usually the medics come up, the corpsmen came up with their stretcher teams at night so they could, but they always made sure that all the jarheads knew that they were corpsmen, because anybody that moved was susceptible to being shot.
My head went over the edge of the hole, and these guys were down the bottom, and up comes this 45. And I never heard it go off, but I saw it. It shot my helmet strap off. So I rolled over like I was dead, and this kid reaches up out of the hole and he fires 4 more shots. So Mel Lynch is up on this little ridge line. He's a machine gunner. Mel's a red-headed Irishman. He said, "What the hell's going on over there?" And this kid says, "I got a Jap out here." I said, "You got a Jap?" I said, "You got Bud Joyce out here."
Colonel Harry B. Liversedge, they called him Harry the Horse because he was tall, had long legs, and a lanky stride. He was the commander of the 28th Marine Regiment that captured Mount Suribachi and put the flag up there.
I was down in a hole, and Ed says, "Get out, I'll take a picture." So I got out, and he took my picture. And I've got a copy of it. It's a nice picture. And then I said, "Okay, Ed, you hop out of the hole, and I'll get one of you." And, well, he hopped out. Of course, there were shells coming around us, too. And I took the picture, but as I took the picture, I could see the flag going up on the mountain. I said, "Hey, there goes the flag up on the mountain." And I cut his head off in the picture.
The first one that I interrogated, he was facing Mount Suribachi, and I had never heard the first word that was uttered from his mouth, but I understood the rest of the sentence immediately, and I knew what hata meant even though I had never heard the word. It meant flag, and I turned around, and the flag was standing. And the translation of hatagataturu means the flag is standing.
I looked at that with the binoculars, and I thought, wow, that really gave us a lift. I mean, that was really something to know that we had the mountain over there. We didn't have the fire coming from Suribachi and the fire coming from the north or the big main part of the island anymore. We just coming from one direction.
Because when you had people shooting down on you and people shooting down on you from the north end, you were just in a bull ring being shot at from both sides, you know, and it's kind of scary. The fact is, it was real scary, to tell you the truth.
I think that the feeling was pretty much like my own, that, hey, we got a foothold. We're here to stay.
It was a glorious moment because it was such a key strategic element to the eventual capture of the island 28 days later.
The fighting had just begun. We discovered that the worst was ahead of us. We didn't know it at the time. One of the major defensive lines on Iwo Jima was a high spot on the island, on that part of the island. It was called Hill 362A, and the name of it came from being 362 feet high. And this was General Kurabachi's main defensive line across the island, and we ran head-on into it.
Another mortar group that had their gun set up about 25 yards behind our gun, they took a direct hit. Both men were dead. The gun was out. And those 2 men the next morning were nothing but smoking clothes. You can't believe how pulverized their bodies were. They didn't look like anything human. It looked like a rag bag of clothes that was still smoking. But just the concussion and the force of that explosion just...
There was a concealed cave there, and I gave the signal to Van and Steve to put the gun in action on that cave, and they ran forward and put the tripod and the gun in it and then started opening fire on it, and the Japanese returned the fire and shot Van Konkelberg, Van, through the shoulder and exited out his back, and Steve had just raised up to adjust the belt, and they shot him in the stomach.
We were blind almost. You couldn't see anything to shoot at. They were so well dug in.
I knew from the way Steve was shot that he probably wouldn't make it. As they put him on the stretcher and carrying him away, he'd kind of give me a sign that he would be all right.
Bougainville was a jungle-infested monster, but it wasn't as vicious. You would attack, they would attack, you'd go on the defensive, they would pull back, whereas on Iwo, it's just a matter of slugging away every stinking day.
We had a Sergeant Anderson, I think his name was, and he was running for the hole, and his Jap was shooting at him with a Nambu or a machine gun, and you could see the bullets coming up, and he was running around the hole, but he didn't want to stop long enough to dive in. He was afraid he'd get shot, you know, and we were in there laughing, like we tell him, dive in, and the round would go past, and finally he got it in, but later on he got killed.
We were so decimated that the next day the 28th Marines came through our lines and they took over the attack on Hill 362A, and later on they were able to conquer it after a great loss on their part.
You'd be surprised. You can't even think about this type of situation until you're faced with it. But then when you're faced with it, then you say, you just take it for, this is a part of what we're doing. You either get killed or you get, you stay alive. And a lot of them were killed. Even when you pass them stacked up like that, you just don't think too much about it.
A personal friend of mine, Edward Tucker from Detroit, Michigan, was wounded on the beach and went aboard a hospital ship for several days, insisted on returning, came back to the island, and lost his life at Hill 362A. Before we got there, one day we were talking and about survival. Would we make it if we went into combat? And I kind of had a feeling I always would, but Tucker said he wouldn't make it, and I said, "Oh, bull, you don't know what you're talking about." He says, "Wait and see, Tatum. Wait and see."
Let's see, Hanners was killed. Sheldon Calhoun was killed, Neil Strawberry was killed, and Arthur Chris was killed, and I think another one, 6 out of our 11.
Last one was this young man named Middlebrooks, who was a combat correspondent finally, and he was carrying ammunition up to the frontline troops, and he got a direct hit. I met his mother. She came out and saw me after the war. She was a nice lady.
I realized that Chapman had been moody and brooding over something all morning. And I didn't realize what it was at the time, but now I do. It was because of his buddy being killed the day before, and he knew it. Chapman stood up one time to check for himself on what's going on around, and that's when they got him right under the front of the hill. And of course, his body fell and his head fell within 6 inches of my knee. And those are rugged times, because I thought a lot of Chapman.
Deep down, you're just concerned about surviving. Am I going to get it tomorrow? Jack got it today. Mac got it yesterday. When is my turn coming up?
He was leaning against me, and I said, "Well, let's go." And he didn't move, and I stood up. And when I stood up, he rolled off, and his head was laying to one side. He stuck his head out, got his head blown off. And all I could do was started running. And when I was running, I was urinating and defecating at the same time running. See, you can't believe it. If you weren't there, you couldn't believe it. It's very hard, even to tell you this right now. This happened.
You have to erase it from your mind and go on, because dwelling over it would only deteriorate your performance later.
I think you all each had your own private thoughts, and you kept mulling it over in your mind, that this can happen to any one of us at any particular time.
the front line, you're in danger because of they're firing on the front line. And then you got the danger in the back from mortar shells and the artillery. But there seems to be a little place between the front and the back. There seems to be like a little safety zone there that's not getting anything. And I saw Colonel Butler there. And I thought, damn, he knows what he's doing, doesn't he? He knows where to be. And I thought, well, it made you feel a little proud because, hey, I ain't got a dummy that's running this outfit. I got somebody who knows what's going on, you know. But then later he got killed, so even though he was a very smart colonel, smartness had nothing to do with it.
I weighed about 150 pounds, 6'2". That's probably what saved me, you know, because I was so thin I could get closer to the ground than some of the guys.
He had a guy by the name of Hayes, and he jumped in beside me one day, and he says, he had a little bit of a speech impediment. He says, Kearns, he says, what I'm going to do after the war is be a farmer. He says, because the ground is taking care of me so long, I'm going to start taking care of it.
The Japanese soldier said death is as light as a feather, but duty heavier than a mountain.
That's a tough soldier. He didn't care for his life. Anybody that didn't care for his life, who would come up to you like, nah, I didn't experience this on Guadalcanal, but it's a true story, with 2 grenades under their arms and surrender and do that and blow himself up with you.
Having a bit of the language ability, we tried to get people to come out, talk to them in their language, and Kozan Seyo, which means please surrender. Most of them would not. They would throw grenades at you, or if they thought that you were getting too close in beside, they'd blow themselves up.
This is how they were, you know. You couldn't dishonor your family or your country. If you did, the only way you could rectify it is commit suicide in whatever method you chose. They were tough.
They were good, disciplined fighters, but if you killed their leader, they were lost. Not much interaction as a unit. That was their downfall, I think.
At that time, we thought of them as dirty Japs, and that was a popular expression. That attitude was ameliorated somewhat when I actually interrogated the prisoners, because you learn that, yes, indeed, they are human beings. They have feelings and emotions. They do indeed cry.
A Japanese captain who was, quote, captured, and every day for 33 years, this captain went to this lady's house. He knew her son who was killed. The son hadn't committed suicide. He'd take off his shoes, he'd bow and ask her forgiveness for him having surrendered. And I don't think that lady has forgiven him yet.
One time, I went down into a bunker just to see how brave I was, and there was a Jap lying on the floor in this bunker, and he looked. You know, they always say they, play dead or play possum or whatever, but I couldn't bring myself to shoot that dead Jap, whatever it was, and I turned around and got the hell out of there as fast as I could.
I saw a dead Japanese soldier, and his wallet was sticking out of his pocket. So I went up and I took his wallet out because I wanted to see if I could find a souvenir. And I did. He had a picture of his mother and father and his wife and baby. I put it back in his wallet, put it back in his pocket. At the time I said, this guy is trying to kill me, and we're trying to kill him. I don't even know him. He doesn't even know me. I wonder, really, why we're doing this. Now, that shows you that I'm not a combat soldier. That instant always stuck with me ever since, and how I felt about it. It was a sad thing, even then.
No, I have no hatred. No, I have no hatred for the Japanese whatsoever. No, I had no hate then for them.
I don't think we knew what hate was. It was more a battle of survival.
In my squad of 6, I was the only one not hit by enemy fire. Everyone else was wounded. We had 2 killed in action and 3 wounded.
Bravest men I ever saw were the United States Navy corpsmen that was supplied or was attached to each Marine company, and even though they were in the Navy, we considered them Marines.
You would push off in the morning, and you'd almost immediately throw your weapon away because you had no use for your weapon because you couldn't use it because there were so many casualties that you worked constantly.
3 of them won Congressional Medal of Honor for their actions, and many of them, almost every one of them was decorated, and probably over 50% of them lost their lives. And these were really angels of mercy. These guys weren't doctors, but they did miracles with people on Iwo Jima.
And most of the time, you would be called by a Marine who would say, my buddy's over there, you know, and they would be in cover and you would not be in cover.
And this rifleman called me over there, and he said, look, he said, I see some Japs. And I said, where? And I'm looking down his arm, you know, our helmets side by side, and he's pointing, and I'm looking down his arm, and just as I see him, he gets shot right in the forehead, right underneath his helmet. I called the corpsman to come over, and he says he's gone. And then the corpsman kind of slid down and sat with his back against the rock, and he was crying, but there was no tears in his eyes, and he just said, I can't go on. He said, I can't look at any more wounded. I can't see anybody else killed. And I kind of put my hand or shoulder around him and tried to comfort him from that standpoint. Somebody hollered, Corpsman, Corpsman, and he grabbed his medical pouch and got up and went over and worked on another guy.
The bones to his lower leg were protruding. And I remember this little short corpsman came down and just straddled him because he was thrashing around in the sand, and bandaged and probably tourniquet put on, and that was the most, I suppose, vivid scene that has stayed with me for years and years and years.
This is where you're put to the test. Either you go out there or what do? You know, do you say, well, I'm not going to go out there and take care of that guy, but you did. And I was just, God or somebody watched out for me.
Never give orders. If you want to tell somebody, do something, if you're his boss, whisper. Don't let anybody see you giving an order because you're asking for trouble. That's why so many officers, you know, giving orders, man, platoon leaders were a dime a dozen. They just didn't last, period.
Nobody went unscathed, no company or anything. They were, I think the damage was probably equal almost across the line.
When you start to get down to your NCOs and your non-commissioned officers, that is, when you get down to those people and you get down to when your company commander is a corporal or a PFC, you don't have any leadership then. And you don't have any leadership when you're in combat. You're in real, real trouble then.
A shell came in. I'm sure it was a mortar shell. And when the smoke cleared, my 2 buddies, both replacements, were dead. I didn't know it was a hit. It knocked me flat, and I got up, and then my knee buckled, and then I realized something was wrong. And that's when I left the island.
We landed on Iwo, our company, with 18 tanks and a few in reserve. We brought 1 original tank back. Actually, we lost relatively small amount of men per equipment loss. Our whole tank crew, Pop Beckley, Dale Ewing, my assistant driver from Lupton, Colorado, and Floyd, the gunner from Tennessee, and Thompson, the loader, all of us came back.
We would come under a severe mortar attack, and one of them got real near me. And the concussion of it kind of knocked me silly. And later on, we ran into more mortar attacks. All of a sudden, I realized the platoon has left. The company's left. And here I am sitting on a rock out there kind of in the open. And I'm thinking about that time, the hell with the war, the hell with the Japanese, the hell with the whole thing. And then I remembered that, first off, the Marine Corps would shoot you if you were a deserter. And if I stayed any longer, I was going to probably get killed by a Jap. So I went looking for the company. And out of some of the rocks there came Sergeant Wendell. And he found me and took a hold of me and said, "Come on," he said, "you're going to be all right." And took me back to where the company was, hidden in the rocks there. And later on that afternoon, he came over and told me that I was out of there, that he was sending Tremulous and I back out of action.
But after we captured it, it became the emergency landing fields for the B-29s that had been hit over Japan. There were 2,251 emergency landings made on Iwo Jima, and they estimate that this saved the lives of almost 25,000 Air Corps crewmen.
They chose the 16th of March to say the battle was ended, so to speak. The island was secured. Well, this was a misnomer because the biggest battles we had on Iwo Jima came after the 16th of March.
Matter of fact, they showed up even a year later. They were finding them coming out of the caves.
We had our ceremony at the cemetery, which was impressive. We didn't have a band, I don't think, but someone made a speech and we stood at attention. And I'm sure that we had taps before we left the cemetery. I picked up sand off of Chapman's grave to bring home to his mother and sister.
When the 9th of October came, 1945, I was real emotional. I was leaving these fellas, you know. I had been with these fellas all this time. And here I was, the only one leaving by myself. You know, you think all this time I'd be glad when the war's over. I'll be so happy, but you're not happy. I mean, you're glad to get away, but you're not happy. You're real sad, you know, about everything. So that's that.
It seemed like all the guys that we left on Iwo in the cemetery were the best men, the best fighters out of all of us. Us humbums came back.
So I kind of resent, and I guess I shouldn't, but I kind of resent at patriotic gatherings whenever things they paid the final supreme sacrifice. They did. Then damn it, give them a medal for it and give their families something for it, not just $10,000. Hell, we made it cheap. A life was worth $10,000.
It happens so fast, you don't have time to think. It would scare you to death. Any ordinary human being would panic or be frightened to death. Of course, we went into this gradually, and this happened every day, so you could lie down or sit down beside a dead Japanese and eat your lunch, if you had any lunch.
And I was very fortunate to come home, you know, in a whole person. I don't feel that my mind was warped or anything like that. Might be, but I don't think so. It's more of an adjustment to be made coming out of a situation like that than going into it.
If I go back, I'd like to go back on my own and deal with my own devils. The devils are in you. You know the things you did there. You know the things you tried to do. Some things you didn't do. You sometimes question, maybe I could have done this differently. I could have done it better.
I did collect a tobacco sack full of gold teeth because they were famous for that, you know, having gold teeth. And I collected a sack full of those. If that's a gruesome thing. But I think that's an indication of how ruthless you let yourself become and how you don't care. You don't really consider them as humans. It's a hard thing to explain. I couldn't do that. I don't think if I were a mortician I could do that at the present time.
Well, I had one boy on Bougainville, he collected ears. That's a terrible thing. We all know that. And he carried clear through it on Guam and kept collecting ears until finally the old man, the CO, heard about it, made him dig a big 6-foot pit and bury them.
Our gunner was an old paratrooper and sort of, well, he was a little bit nuts, if you pardon the expression. He would open up with a machine gun and laugh, you know. He just, there he goes, ha ha ha, and
it was a rainy afternoon, and we're making the push, and raining, and we stopped, and I was soaking wet. I was cold, and even though it was on the island and everything, and I looked over at this one draw, and I seen a poncho covering a body, and I went over there and I picked that poncho up, and there was this dead Marine about my size and everything, and he was as dry as a bone.
It's hell, but you get used to it. You still didn't like the Japanese, but the dead Marines were just something that was there.
I took his socks, his shorts, his T-shirt, his underpants, you know, his pants. The only thing I left on him was his blouse, because that had his name and serial number on it, and I kept my blouse, but I changed clothes with him completely, and I redressed him, and I put the poncho back over, and I said, good Lord, forgive me, but I was dry.
I think I talk more here than I have. I don't think my daughter has ever heard me talk, you know, about my experiences. She's never heard that.
You're making me say things that, you know, you're bringing back more things, and not that I'm ashamed to say them. It's over and done with. That's about it.
You know, you think that you get over the trauma of a situation, but you really don't. You talk with your old friends who had their experiences, and you're casual about it, but there are moments when you remember your Marine. Your friends that were killed never got their chance in life. It's too bad.